Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Ultimate D2C Operations Stack webinar. Today, we're going to discuss strategies for growing and future-proofing your brand. The last 3 months have been completely crazy, and underlying all of the gains and losses in e-commerce is an operational foundation. So we're going to go over some of the tools that you could use to build resiliency and ensure that you're surviving and thriving in this environment. I'm going to go over a few webinar logistics. First up, we have some polls for each of our presenters today. That'll be on the right-hand side. You'll see a tab with polls. A poll will launch at the beginning of each section, so be sure to answer them, and you'll see the results in real time. Questions. We have a questions tab as well on the right-hand side. Feel free to ask questions of the speakers, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end of the webinar. Lastly, I will also be uploading resources as the presenters share their slides. If you're interested in any of the resources, they'll be available in the chat. So here are some of the things we're going to cover today. We're going to learn a little bit about using a multi-channel approach to build brand resiliency. We're going to talk about growing your manufacturing network outside of China, forecasting customer demand to optimize inventory, and diversifying supply and demand, a little bit of network and design in 2020 and beyond. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Chad Rubin. And we're going to talk about building an operations stack to survive and thrive in a post-COVID world. Chad, take it away. Chad, you're up.
Yeah, sorry about that. My connection was scattered. So thanks everyone for joining. I'm Chad Rubin here. I'm really thankful that we have some awesome partners joining us today, and hopefully we can drop some incredible knowledge for everybody that's tuning in. There's an incredible backdrop of things that are happening, and yet we all have to try to continue to do business as usual here. And so today we're just talking about how we're going to work through what you're experiencing and building a foundation from the ground up to sort of like when times get tough, you got to really just pull together and see what you can do to optimize and improve. And I do that on a personal level, and I do that on a business level as well. I've been in e-commerce for 10 years. I started an e-commerce company where we manufacture very unsexy vacuum filters and coffee filters and air filters. And we started building Skubana out of my own pain. And so Skubana really is a result of what I went through as a brand and merchant, and now we offer Skubana as an operational platform to automate hundreds of companies that are selling direct to consumer right now. Some of them are listed on the screen, and a lot of them are listed on our brand new site that we just launched 2 days ago. So without further ado, let's just get into like the specifics of what we're going to discuss today. I'm hoping everyone can see the screen as I'm pushing through these slides. It's the first time I'm using this for slide presentation. But essentially what's happened really is that $200 billion has went from offline to online. And that's happened at a very accelerated pace. And so right now, like there's a lot of beneficiaries from what's happened in the environment that's happening right now. And given the devastation and the uncertainty, certainly a lot of companies have been able to grow, and growth is possible. You just have to double down and know where to look. So if you look at what's happening right now in e-commerce, and if we go to the following slide, you'll see the categories, the sort of shift in where spending has gone given COVID, right? You'll see a lot of it's gone to essentials. People are spending more time indoors. Baby products are essential, toys, health and wellness, working from home, office equipment, et cetera. And you look that it is so divided, not just like this country, but also look at this graph here. The left everything's weighted towards these essentials. And you look at the right, jewelry, luxury, automotive, fashion, outdoor, electronics, and travel have pretty much came to a halt or are seeing negative growth. And it's truly in my belief that I think that there's going to be a shift, especially as we get back to whatever that new normal looks like. People are going to want to deviate back to the norm of what they were doing. And we're going to see a big shift in where those dollars are going. So you have to just have that intuition and foresight to see how can you actually like capitalize on some of the momentum as there's a shift, as proximity, social distancing starts to ease. So, and like I'm really from the firm belief that like right now you need to actually be doubling down on your business. And so if it's slow right now, you should start figuring out what you can do to optimize your business. And if it's actually growing at a very rapid clip, also being super productive during this time, how do you actually figure out how to do more with less? And so that's kind of what my slides are going to be about, is doing more with less and turning things into your advantage, especially if you do have a leaner team right now, or you're working from home. And it's more important than ever to actually have a system in place. I think one of the key things for any entrepreneur or operator that's out there is like being resilient and being persistent, especially in this time. And so I don't think many of us, even on this phone call today, would get to where we are in life as a business or even professionally or personally if it wasn't for the resiliency that we have. So there's 3 things that I think that you can do right now to either just survive, if you're just looking to just like get by and get through and endure the pain that you're experiencing as a business right now, because I know there's some people that are going through things that are even dialed in on this webinar. And then the others that are thriving that can just be doing things differently. So it's all about how do you do things differently to level up and just accelerate your business from where it is today. So these 3 levers that I'm going to discuss with everybody is unify, automate, and grow. So it's all about like, how can you unify your data, use it so you can act on it? How can you use technology or systems to automate it, and letting your high value, high impact employees do what they need to do, and letting technology do what it needs to do, so that you're not dealing with repetitive, low value tasks. And then lastly, growing, right? Taking what you've unified and what you've automated, putting that together and making magic, right? So you can thrive in the good times, and you can also protect you from the downside in the bad times. So firstly, we're going to talk about unification. So yes, you can play defense in a tough environment, but there's ways that you can keep playing offense to do better. So here's an example. I'm just going to give some examples. We just brought on a client that makes a lactation massager for breastfeeding mothers. He's doing great right now. He's invented it, a really great product. And I went to his site and he had all these great bundles. And I learned from him, because wait, that's amazing. Why don't I take a great SKU and combine it with a not a good SKU and combine it together, and let's just make a quarantine kit. And so there's ways that you can increase your AOV. You can get rid of cash or inventory that is technically cash that's sitting, by putting these products together and getting that sell through and getting that momentum going. So anyway, playing offense, understanding how you can make more profit. And a lot of that is, I think you can do that through bundling kitting. You can do that through gift cards. I know BigCommerce just launched something with gift cards as well. And also just figuring out how you can promote those kits and bundles. The other piece I think is super important is just being direct to everywhere. And not just, I look at each of these channels as just channels, not as businesses. And so you want to make sure you're as diversified as possible. So I always say this is like, I look at playing Monopoly as e-commerce. You want to be on every piece of the board to win. And if that means being on many different channels, whether it's Amazon or Walmart or eBay, or maybe it's Sephora, or maybe it's Zola, maybe it's Huckberry, but embracing many different channels along with retail. And interestingly enough, since retail has offline retail, brick and mortar has taken such a hit, emphasis has actually moved away from that channel. And maybe now's the time to actually re-emphasize it, because if nobody's emphasizing it, maybe that's the channel actually you should be looking into right now. If they have downtime and nobody's reaching out to them, now you can be different and do what others aren't doing. And I know Mr. Resnick on the call from Sourcify is going to talk more about this. I truly do believe that the days of having one warehouse, at least for the majority of us, are over, and you need to have a much stronger footprint to survive. And so for me, I actually look at where people are buying from, and this is all about having that unified data. Look at where people are buying from, what percentage are coming from each state, and analyzing it so you can actually make sure that you're placing your merchandise as close as possible to the customer. And so, for example, Nate shared with me a great 3PL that I now use. So it comes down to knowing the right people that can give you the right insights that can really move the needle in your business. And so it could be that your factories are shutting down. It could be that China is shutting down. It could be that air freight is too expensive. Maybe you want to fulfill from somewhere else. All these things right now are coming up for a lot of us that are on the call, and hopefully we'll be able to answer a lot of these in Q&A. And of course, hopefully Nate will be able to answer them in his session. But all of this is coming up, and so you just have to think differently and adapt to the times, or else you're going to be left behind. One example I wanted to just give a shout out to that's really thriving and actually more than thriving in this environment, accelerated during the pandemic, is Tushy. They are a D2C bidet company. And so they're a customer of ours. The COO is actually, I consider him a friend at this point, but they've been able to unify their data and identify what's been fast selling, and also understand how to use our system so they can leverage how to ship much faster into the US, since they actually ran out of stock so quickly. You know, there was a run on toilet paper. Well, when there's no toilet paper, people start getting strategic and looking into bidets. And I actually think that bidets are a much more civilized way to do it. So they were able to route those orders that were out of stock. They came in from virtual warehouses that were able to be fulfilled from overseas, direct to consumer, and they just thrived during peak demand. It's been pretty unbelievable to watch, along with just making their customers super happy. All right, so the next section I want to talk about, next lever, is really automation. So for me, it comes down to how can you actually do more with less, with a leaner team, and use technology to become an outsized team where you're looking at a much better ratio of revenue to employee. And so that's a key metric that I always talk to with other individuals that are in the e-commerce space. It's like, how many employees do you have? Oh, the more employees, the better. Well, that's not always how I look at it, right? It's a good cocktail party question. But for me, if you can do more with less, and you can still put more money back into your pockets or back into your employees' pockets, and allow them to do higher value activities, why not? So it's putting back time into your own hands and time back into your employees' hands. So it's all about, for me, it's about being nimble and how you can use technology to automate a lot of the mundane. And so finding technology, again, it's so hard to talk about automation, because essentially I used to have a 30-person company on the e-commerce side, and now I have one person at my e-commerce company using technology to drive it forward. And so at least during this time, just changing the way you're thinking, seeing how you can lean out your cost structure, and identifying like what tasks need to be automated. And one of the ways to do that is to really look at where you spend your time today. Doing a audit of, like, do I have a bucket list and do I have an effort list? And looking at those two lists and figuring out what do you hate doing and how can you identify what technologies you can utilize, or individuals, but hopefully technologies, to automate those low value tasks you're spending time, and time is money. And also, by the way, it's subject to human error. So how can you find technology to just automate these things that people just spend hours and hours doing? So, and that goes back to, again, lowering your overhead. So like for example, at Skubana, like we identified someone in the company who was really into understanding what's happening in COVID, and they became a resource for us, almost like a coach, to say, like, hey, here's how we should be navigating it. This is what other companies are doing. This is what we shouldn't be doing anymore. This is what we should be changing. And it really moved the needle for our company tremendously. And part of that is just like overhead in general. How can you essentially have automation automatically setting up for yourself to do the rate shopping, to do bundle breakdowns, to fulfill if you have multiple different warehouses? Next up is essentially your accounting, right? So if you have an accounting team in-house, or maybe you have an outsourced team, we're not in the staff replacement business, but we're in the staff augmentation business. And bookkeepers, it's all about driving hourly dollars for overhead expense for your own company to do your books. And so how can you use technology? So Skubana just released a QuickBooks connector that essentially allows you to not replace your bookkeeper, but augment them so they don't have to do those low value tasks and charge you $100 or $150 an hour. So we'll be able to streamline and transfer all your revenue data, all your fees, all your expenses, everything you need into QBO, QuickBooks Online, for accurate reporting and reconciliation. It's pretty much a game changer. So reach out if you have questions about it. Happy to help. The other piece is just like making sure that you're delighting customers, and that's making sure that you're not running out of stock. And if you run out of stock, whether it's people are coming to your site and there's a visitor and they don't buy, it affects your conversion rate. Whether they come to Amazon and they don't buy and they see that you're not Prime eligible, you're not going to have a good bestseller rank. You're going to drop from page one. If you're not on page one, you're not relevant. Bingo, bango, bongo. So how do you prevent that from happening? Well, you need to have the right process or system in place. Spreadsheets are not going to cut it. And too often do I hear people rely on spreadsheets to forecast the demand plan, and that is literally just not the way to win in this environment. And I always want to give a shout out to a great team in Death Wish Coffee. They got their big break after winning the Super Bowl, and they just started selling out. So they came on Skubana, and they essentially started automating their entire operational processes, and they have multiple different fulfillment centers now, different roasters, all these moving parts, so multi-SKU, multi-fulfillment, multi-warehouse, that are now integrated and unified into Skubana. And this is a quote from the founder, who also, I consider people that are coming to Skubana, especially people that I've been working with for years, family. And he joined the Skubana family years ago and hasn't left. And they haven't oversold one item since coming on, but essentially it's all about how can you delight your customers. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. And then lastly, you have grow. So the last lever to pull here is how do you take your unified information that you have, take your automation, sort of mix that together and create magic and grow. And when I talk about grow, it's growing in many different ways, right? Maybe you're automating your business so you can grow from a personal level and you can do more, spend more time with your son or your daughter or your family or your significant other. And so here you're looking at powerful combinations are creating magic where you can actually now try to figure out what do you need to liquidate? What do you need to be buying more? Like, is anybody, I'm curious on the call if people are looking at maybe in the past 30 days, what hasn't sold, or in the past week, what hasn't sold. That's the kind of insight that you need to figure out, and doing that performance valuation on your inventory to sort of realize actual cash from your inventory and redeploy that back into the business for a positive ROI. You've got growing with the right SKUs. So understanding how to replenish based on rules in the system. So basically, instead of using spreadsheets, how do you essentially have a technology work for you as a 24/7 employee to essentially create a purchase order for you awaiting authorization? Or analyzing the lifetime value of your customers, not just overall, but looking at Shopify. What's your LTV? How many were one-time buyers versus two-time buyers versus eight-time buyers, and what percentage of those purchases are coming from those individuals, and how can you remarket to those individuals and open back up their wallet, right? Doubling down on the customers that essentially have already paid you money, they've put in your credit card. It's that much easier to capture more dollar share from those customers than going out to find a new customer. And if you look at someone like Nomad, again, friends of mine also happen to be in the Skubana fam, but this company essentially came to us with serious problems of overstocking, didn't have a holistic view of where they were making money, where they were losing money on a SKU by SKU level, and we came in to help them, and we've been partnered ever since. And so while I realize, and we'll talk more about this in Q&A, hopefully, like not all journeys are beautiful. I'm reading a great book right now, and this image on the left-hand side is called The Messy Middle. And so when people start a company, they're so enthusiastic, and they realize it's really, really hard. And then they work really, really hard at it. And then suddenly they're reaching great momentum, but there's all these things that happen in the middle of that timeline that they have to endure. Painful moments that many operators and e-commerce operators, even maybe right now, are going through. So these are, it's kind of a crazy time, and I'm not saying it's so pretty and so easy, but what I'm trying to recap here is, how do you take a smaller team and how do you make an outsized impact and dominate in a time where it's turbulent? So unifying your data in one place, in my opinion, figuring out how to optimize your life and your time, where you spend your time that you shouldn't, automating the heck out of it, and then putting that together so you can actually grow the business on the defense, but also putting you ready for the offense when things do pick up post-COVID and post-Floyd issues that are happening in the world right now. So the last piece I just want to share, and I've mentioned a few of our customers on the line, is that you can always feel free to reach out. My personal email is right here on the screen. It's chad@Skubana. Don't be afraid to reach out and just ask questions. Ask me who my favorite 3PL is or who I recommend. Ask me who I recommend for returns. It's all about your network and how you can learn from other people. And by the way, it's not only me. Like, to grow, I'm here to help, but there's a massive community of people that are here to help you grow. And that is in our Run D2C community, where it's an invite-only community. We bring together others in the e-commerce world that are doing great and those that have done great or are struggling right now, and we help each other win. So if you want to join, you can use this link right here, bit.ly/Slack D2C, and go and apply. And there's a whole community of people that are here to help you. All right, so I think that covers my session. If you have questions, put them in the chat box. I'll be active. I'll be responding to questions, and of course, feel free to email me.
Thank you so much, Chad. Next up, we have Jill from Inventory Planner. Jill's going to talk about forecasting customer demand to optimize inventory so you can avoid missed revenue and make smarter decisions about what to buy. So, Jill, take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Gina. So I'm excited to follow up on Chad's talk because I think that I was nodding vigorously as he was mentioning several points. So we're going to expand on some things that he talked about. Inventory Planner, we're a software system that forecasts customer demand. We integrate with 30 different platforms, including Skubana, including BigCommerce. So picking up on all that functionality that Chad was talking about, and then really digging into forecasting needs so that we can optimize your inventory, which really means optimize your cash flow, right? Cash flow is the name of the game. By way of background, I was a merchant for 4 years. I took over an existing e-commerce company. I was an inventory planner customer for 3.5 of those. We went from having absolutely no system for ordering or forecasting, other than walking around in the warehouse and kind of looking around, and really running out of cash. I mean, we were on a downward trajectory. Things were not looking good in terms of cash flow. Started using demand planning, we're able to turn that around. And then a couple of years ago, we were able to sell our business. So it can really make or break in terms of what's happening with your cash flow and making sure that customers have what they want. So the point of forecasting is making sure customers have what they want, when they want it, and where they want it. You know, this speaks to having it in the right warehouse, like Chad was mentioning. And the other part of this is not just not missing revenue because you're out of stock, but also identifying that overstock. It is cash sitting on your warehouse shelves. Get it out of there. Put it somewhere else in your business that it's going to perform better for you, whether that's better performing inventory or you're putting it into ads to get new customers. Think about the best place that you're going to get the best ROI for that cash for your business. So let's dig into it. Like, how do you get started with forecasting? So the first thing to think about is your forecasting method. The philosophy behind forecasting demand is thinking about, we're using past data to indicate what's going to happen in the future. So we need to think about what is the relevant time period that will indicate what's going to happen in the future. So if I have a really trendy item, I can look at what happened in the last 14 days, 30 days. That will be responsive to those customer trends in demand for what's going to happen in the next few weeks. If I have a seasonal item, though, it doesn't matter what happened last month. It matters what happened last year and the year before, because we want to pick up on year-over-year growth. We want to make sure that we're hitting those peaks and valleys. So as we're heading into Q4, as an example, then we want to be ramping up and having enough inventory on hand to meet the demand that we know is coming at that time. We can also think about items with a short sales history. You know, maybe it's something that belongs to a category that would sell well in the summer, but we haven't had that item for a long time, so we don't know that it would perform well in the summer. Well, we can tie it to the category and say, we know how this should perform with similar items. So think about that forecasting method. What is the relevant period of time for data so that we're computing that sales rate correctly? The next thing to think about is sales when you are in stock. So we need to keep in mind when we've been in stock and out of stock, because we're really trying to get at how much do customers buy when we have something available. So let's take an example. If we sold 30 items last month, we have a sales velocity of roughly 1 unit per day. However, if we were out of stock for half the month, truly the rate that customers purchased when it was available is 2 units per day. So you can see how it makes a huge difference to take into account when you're in stock and out of stock. If we're not taking that into account, we're going to be under forecasting. You run out of stock again, and you're just repeating the cycle over and over again, missing out on revenue every single time. Bad news. So let's avoid that. So the underlying point here is to think about what is our sales velocity? What is the rate of sales? So sometimes I talk to people who are talking about a reorder point. You know, maybe when I get to 20 units, that's when I reorder. The bad part about a static number like that is that as your demand for that item grows, as your store grows, 20 units isn't going to be relevant anymore. It's something you have to come back to and spend time on and maintain that number. So think about rate of sales. So if I'm selling 2 units per day and I want to cover a period of 30 days, I'm thinking about the rate of sales as it applies moving forward. So just keep that in mind. All right, so now that we've talked about forecasting demand, what do we do with it? Creating that purchase order. So there's a lot of data. This can really be an overwhelming step. And just in case you don't have all the cash in the world and you need to make some choices about what to order, let's talk through a few different metrics to pay attention to. So one of these is forecast lost profit. I think this really gets to the opportunity cost of if you don't act now to order, you run out of stock and miss out on this profit for your company. Okay, so I think that really distills what is the cost of not acting now versus placing that order, getting inventory in stock so that you have it when your customers want it. Another metric that you can think about is, so you've figured out the demand, you've figured out what that replenishment quantity is, multiply that by your profit. Ideally, if you don't have that handy, then multiply it by your retail value. So that can get a sense of, is this going to result in a lot of revenue for my company or just a little bit? If it's just a little bit, maybe that's something I can wait on until we have the cash to replenish that item, or look at discontinuing that item. So that's one way to think about prioritizing stock for replenishment. The flip side of that is the overstock. So like I said, cash sitting on your shelves, how do we get it out of here? So maybe we've forecasted demand, we've got 1 month of overstock. Okay, not great, but let's compare it to other items that might be overstocked for 18 months, 12 months, something like this. High priority, get it out of there. How do we get some cash? I think the bundling idea that Chad mentioned, you know, pairing it with a high performing SKU is a great idea for getting items out of there. You can even look at quantity bundles depending on your product for that item. You know, maybe you can move out 5 at a time, 10 at a time for slightly lower cost per item. However, think about your shipping costs, that if you're shipping out 10 units to one customer, that's lower shipping costs than 10 individual units to 10 individual customers. All right, so think about the bundling. I think there's a lot that can be done there. It's a really great idea to explore. All right. One last idea on prioritization. We've all kind of heard of the 80-20 rule. There's this idea of ABC classes in inventory. So our A class items are our top 80% of performers. They generate the first 80% of our revenue. That's one way you can kind of triage your best performers, your highest priority for replenishment. We get down to B class as our next 15%, and then C class is our final 5%. Those are our poorest performers. Those can be items that you occasionally are okay with being out of stock, due to cash flow issues, or maybe you discontinue them. You really need to think about what is the cost of replenishing this, not just in terms of dollars spent with my vendor, but the time it takes to tend to these items, to store them in my warehouse. Is it worth it? Maybe think about discontinuing those items and tightening up your product catalog. All right, so what does all of this mean? We've talked about cash flow a lot. I can tell you from personal experience, the result for the company that I was running was we were able to improve our stock turn by 8 times, which means the time between getting inventory in the door and getting it out the door to our customers improved by 8x. So you can imagine that our cash flow situation improved dramatically between when we had no system and then demand planning to figure out what customers wanted. Another merchant that we've worked with really was looking at, okay, how much cash overall do we have tied up in our inventory? Whether it's moving fast or slow, it's all, cash that we have in our warehouse. So basically they went to a new system of ordering smaller amounts more frequently. They have a trendy item, and so that allowed them to be much more responsive. They weren't as locked into these big orders that then were meant to last them a long time. The result was in 6 weeks, they were able to reduce their stock value by $1.5 million. I don't know about where you're sitting, where I'm sitting. If I have another $1.5 million that's now liquid that wasn't before, that's a really big deal in 6 weeks. So, just being really aggressive about thinking about what inventory is working for me in terms of turning around that investment as fast as possible and getting rid of the ones that aren't. So that's what forecasting can do. Inventory planner as a system, like I said, we integrate with other platforms. So we're bringing in your sales information, your product information, and we're going to calculate all of these metrics automatically so we can help identify what is our forecast lost profit? Where am I overstocked? What do I need to order? Then we create that purchase order, sync it over to your Skubana account as an example, and then you're managing your stock appropriately, like Chad was talking about, not overselling, making sure that you have that all in stock as you need to. So just really streamlining that process, saving you time, saving you money, and really leveling up your operations. So that's a quick look at how to get started with forecasting, and let me know if you have any questions at the end of the call then.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was great. Up next, we have Nathan from Sourcify. He's going to talk about growing your manufacturing network beyond China to decrease supply chain risks and offset vendor disruptions. So Nathan, take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gina and Chad, and really appreciate everyone tuning in today. It's a crazy time in the world and so much going on. So I'm really excited to touch base on what we're seeing in the supply chain. What I'm really going to be diving into today is how to diversify your supply chain outside of China. I would assume most people tuning in are probably manufacturing primarily in China. And so today we're going to touch base on how to really get out of China. A bit about me before I start. In the past 10 years, I've brought hundreds of different products to market. I've ran 6-figure e-commerce brands myself. One of my favorite ones is where I invented the first leather watch strap without holes. It worked like a zip tie, like a belt buckle. I've raised over $1 million on Kickstarter, and I used to live in China in high school, actually, as a foreign exchange student. And so I speak fluent Mandarin, and I now run Sourcify, and we help Fortune 1000s and high growth e-commerce brands manufacture products around the world. So what we're going to touch on today is, first and foremost, countries to consider for production, what to look out for in each country, the current status of production in each country, especially with what's going on with COVID-19, and then where and how to actually find, these factories in each countries. So a lot of people ask me, why they should diversify their supply chain. Right off the bat, it's about de-risking. How many people saw what happened in China in February? Like literally, China was shut in February because COVID-19. I mean, we didn't get anything out of China. It was a crazy time. People usually, of course, forecast Chinese New Year, but with the extended closure, it caused a lot of problems and people running out of inventory because they were, solely based in China. So first and foremost, you want to diversify to de-risk your supply chain. Secondly, when it comes to production, you actually really want to focus your manufacturing hubs around those native production environments. So if you're thinking about like handcrafted goods, India has a lot of these nice arts and crafts products that are really special to that country. And you also want to mitigate your raw material reliance. So, a lot of the world's raw material comes from China, but there are capabilities in Vietnam and India and Pakistan, especially leather in Pakistan. We do a decent amount of sporting goods out of Pakistan. So it's something to consider. When it comes to challenges diversifying outside of China, the biggest question that we really see is how to find a factory outside of China. I mean, there isn't a platform like Alibaba necessarily for Vietnam or India or Pakistan. And though there are some factories that are listed on Alibaba that aren't based in China, there's still primarily Chinese factories on Alibaba. So another component you have to really look at is managerial overhead. If you're primarily working with China and then all of a sudden you're working with Vietnam and India as well, there can be a lot of complications with communication, as well as culture differences and quality fade risk. So if you're trying to produce the same product in China as well as in Vietnam, oftentimes you're going to see quality differences between those two factories. And so as you diversify your production, that's going to be really important to look at. Countries we'll discuss today, America. I think right now, it's a really interesting time, for consumers in terms of their spending habits and how they're really looking at where products are produced in the world. Because a lot of consumers now, they really want to buy products that are made in America. It is, more expensive for the most part to produce products here domestically. But at the same time, if your brand and if your products resonate with those that really want to purchase products in America, it's worthwhile to look at. We're also going to dive into Vietnam, India, and Pakistan. So America, that domestic appeal that we touched on, there's a lot of brands that are really utilizing this domestic appeal. There are primarily, high manufacturing standards here in the US, and it's easy to track. Most of the time, a lot of these factories are close by. You can go visit them. It's cheaper and faster shipping. So when you think about logistics in terms of freight forwarding, it's going to be a lot more affordable to actually manufacture your products from a logistics standpoint in America. IP protection is also top of mind. A lot of people ask when they're moving production to different countries in Asia, how do I protect my IP in Vietnam or India? And oftentimes what we say is that it's protected at the border. You're actually going to protect your IP at the border through trademarks and patents in America rather than in those countries. And of course, it's easier to communicate. The main cons, definitely limited production capabilities, higher costs. When you think about your products, the main cost that goes into producing your products are the labor and materials that go into it. And labor rates are, higher here in America than overseas. Best products for America, I would say anything that, you ingest, any vitamins or supplements. A lot of supplements are produced here in America. There are some good clothing factories, especially in the garment districts of LA. And then some really good, metal fabrication as well. Most, consumer electronics and footwear and toys are produced overseas, so we aren't really, seeing a lot of that here domestically. For Vietnam, I would say what's, really nice right now is there's less restrictions on trade. Especially the past 2 years with the China trade wars, there was a lot of conflicts, of course, that caused people to diversify production to Vietnam. Labor rates right now have actually gone up a little bit in Vietnam, and that's just supply demand factor of labor in Vietnam. Vietnam has about 1/14 the population of China. So it's got, under 100 million people, and China has almost, or has over 1.3 billion people right now. But Vietnam is very strong in cut and sew, so garments, textiles, bags, even furniture. is really strong in Vietnam. But they have limited raw material access, so a lot of those factories are actually importing the raw material from China, which can add, to lead time as well as, logistic overhead. And then there's fewer factories and typically higher MOQs. The biggest factory I've actually ever been to was a shoe factory that was producing for, major Fortune 500 brands like Clark's, and they had 10,000 people in their factory in Vietnam. It was literally a little city. I mean, it was an incredible operation to see. So like, I mentioned best products are primarily backpacks, footwear, and some furniture. I wouldn't produce toys there. We had some products that were toy oriented, trying to produce in Vietnam. And what, we realized is that a lot of those factories don't have the certificates to sell into, large retail like Walmart and Target from a certificate standpoint. India, it's a rapidly growing economy. The infrastructure there is definitely in question. But it's all based on, raw long-term relationships. And India actually, has high quality products if you find the right factories. That's the key here. I think when you diversify production is finding the right factories. But a lot of times there are natural disasters that have cut out power to different factories in India for, long periods of time. Best products, I would say clothing, textiles, rugs, jewelry, all sorts of leather goods. I wouldn't produce, any toys or any kids-oriented products in India. Pakistan, it's a nice developing country. It's got high-quality products from a sporting goods standpoint. If you look at where Nike and Adidas produce a lot of their sporting goods, a lot of it's coming out of Pakistan, but they have slower logistics and oftentimes higher MOQs. But the best products are definitely agriculture-oriented, machinery, and anything to do with leather. When you think about sourcing across countries, the key is making sure the infrastructure is there. So if you have to forecast, how your factory is getting raw material to their actual assembly factory, it's a lot of overhead for you. So, you want to rely on the factory in those countries to do that. Time zones are always going to be in question, and then just operational overhead of your team. Factory certificates, we'll touch on this just briefly, but typically standard certificates are, ISO or BSCI certificates. A lot of these factories too, sometimes you have to, make sure that they have the ability to export. A lot of them are more domestic oriented factories. And so sometimes you're actually going to have to go through a trading company to work with a local factory in Pakistan or India. Just, touching on these certificates, some are quality management oriented, some are environmental oriented. It's nice to see that these factories have that, but it's not always completely necessary. And a lot of times with these certificates, what will happen is that, they'll go in, get inspected, they'll make their factory look perfect for that day of inspection. And then the next day, it won't look the same basically. Always make sure that your factory is registered to be able to deal with foreign trade. So, if not, you're gonna have to work with a broker when it comes to exporting products from that factory. And, to find a factory in these countries, America, I'd say some of the best resources are ThomasNet, AmericanManufacturing.org, IndieSource, or Makers Row. India, Vietnam, and Pakistan, you really have to go to trade shows over there. I think that's the best bet. But obviously right now people aren't traveling and a lot of these trade shows are coming online, which is, beneficial for you to be able to, communicate and try to facilitate and build a relationship with these factories in these countries through these online trade shows. So when you manufacture outside of China, especially, with the tariffs we saw last year, there was a company we worked with that transitioned furniture production to Vietnam and saved 15% net of their unit cost, which was pretty incredible. We had another company we worked with that was producing fabric in Taiwan and shipping that like special fabric blend to a cut and sew facility in China. And they vertically integrated their cut and sew operation in Vietnam and saved 10% on logistics. And then, company C really wanted to find unique handcrafted items for a home goods category, and we're able to use Sourcify to do that in India. If anyone has questions about manufacturing, just put it in the chat. I like to, answer as many questions as possible. And, if you want more information about Sourcify, just go to sourcify.com.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. Last up, we have Jean from Shipwire. John's going to talk about diversifying your shipment and your fulfillment activities this year, 2020 and beyond. So, Jean, take it away.
Thanks, Gina. I appreciate being invited to participate today. Give a shout out to Skubana and the Skubana family. My name is Jean Francois. I pronounce it Jean. My mom calls me Jean. I'm the head of strategic partnerships and business development for Shipwire, an e-commerce division of Ingram Micro. I came to Shipwire at first as a customer running a small e-commerce business back in the day, like 2013. And I'm proud to be a part of a team that has done a ton of e-com innovation over the last couple of years. So let's get into this a bit. So over the last couple of months, we should probably set the stage by understanding that over the last couple of months, brands have renewed their interest in diversifying demand. Last week, it was my wife's birthday, and normally I'd be in the mall somewhere trying to find a gift for her. I belong to the droves of folks scouring perfectly curated shops to find discretionary goods. But the truth is commercial traffic, foot traffic anyway, is down. And the commercial real estate industry is preparing for what is forecasted to be the biggest slump in decades. These are all signs of a slowing economy, but digital traffic, foot traffic rather, is up by a significant amount. And I think Chad definitely referenced this in his first couple of slides, but the US Commerce Department kind of did a research study and saw that as a percentage of overall e-commerce has spiked. In 2009, e-commerce as a percentage of overall sales represented about 5%. And in 2019, e-commerce sales as a percentage of overall retail was 16%. That's a growth of about 11% over 10 years. In the period of 8 weeks after the COVID kind of crisis started, e-commerce sales as a percentage of overall retail hit about 27%. From 16%, delineating an 11% jump over 8 weeks. So if you compare that 8 weeks versus that 10-year gap, it's really astounding at how fast, as Chad mentioned, the 200 billion is transitioning over to e-com. That's kind of crazy. And I think that, we need to take a look at how brands have traditionally gone to market. So before we get ahead of ourselves, let's set the stage by understanding what happened in like 2013, 2014, 2015. I was starting to work for Shipwire, and this is when the biggest CPGs, we're talking about hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in revenue, were coming to us because they were hearing that retailers like Walmart and Macy's were going to be phasing down the amount of inventory purchased through bulk purchase orders, and instead switching over to a dropship model in order to basically be more cash efficient. These brands were faced with a unique challenge, and that challenge was they were quite incapable of pivoting to this dropship model, and that's for a couple of reasons, right? The first is they operated in legacy systems, essentially, that could not differentiate individual SKUs and individual units, rather, or eaches versus pallets at the order management level or the front end level, right? And on the inventory side as well. They also had no process flows, workflows, or physical infrastructure at the warehouse level to allow them to support direct to consumer very well. This was around 2015 when drop shipping was still being defined. Fast forward to today, over the last few months, we've seen that e-commerce growth has accelerated.
Gina, I think your microphone just dropped off.
Oh, sorry about that.
You're back.
Okay, perfect. Before we talk about how brands can take advantage of these types of opportunities, I think it's time to talk about some of the gaps that traditional go-to-market really has, right? So some of these gaps are largely businesses that largely depend on purchase orders we're talking about like national brands to drive revenue, have seen firsthand how they have been sidelined in the past couple of weeks, right? Couple of months. And beyond the intricacies of like seasonality and by any given category, the fact remains that if you're relying very heavily on any one distribution channel to reach your customers, your brand is definitely at risk, right? Over time, we've seen 3 types of use cases. And the first is digitally native brands. These are brands that primarily leverage their own e-commerce channel to reach customers, and that's online, right? For these types of brands, brand equity is definitely important to them. Owning customer data is important to them. Customizing the customer experience is important to them. For these reasons, they've been hesitant to diversify kind of their sales channels, right? Some of them. And we've seen reports over the past few weeks, and us at Shipwire, we've known for a long time that Amazon has been kind of leveraging that data that they have on customer transactions to build competing products. And for a combination of these reasons, some digitally native brands that really love control over their brand have hesitated to diversify their sales channel, especially with Amazon. The second group are national brands that have massive distribution, and capital efficiencies are certainly important to them because capital efficiencies drive revenue. And from massive purchase orders and CapEx on infrastructure side, these teams generally don't have the resources or the in-house experience to support an agile direct-to-consumer operation, right? The third group is what I call Amazon only, and they are either groups that are digitally native brands that only sell on Amazon as a secondary channel, or national brands or small businesses that only sell on Amazon as their digital channel, and as well as entrepreneurs that have businesses that are solely on Amazon, right? For these individuals, idiosyncratic risk is definitely inherent, and SLAs for Amazon has slowed since COVID, and FBA seems to be operating at a lower level, especially for multi-channel, and it's time to probably establish new touch points with the customers. So you can acquire more customers and have more ways to get to market. That's the number one reason to diversify your demand channels, right? It's an obvious reason, right? Since 2020, there are more touch points that you can have with your customer and therefore more opportunities to tell your story. Why not take advantage of retailers and marketplaces and their customer acquisition mechanisms, their demand channels, right? Branded e-com goes without saying that branded e-com is the primary touch point for your brand to reach out to customers. It's an opportunity to set the tone for your customer experience. Brands like Bulletproof, brands like Glossier, and others have capitalized on the owned e-com channel as one that sets the tone for all other channels from a customer experience perspective. And this is important as depending on the product mix and product distribution network, this particular channel might be your most profitable. But we've seen use cases where brands can be crushed by the weight of their own success as, for example, the cost of customer acquisition goes up. And what's helpful with that is to diversify on retail.com and marketplace, because your cost of customer acquisition across channels goes down the more you diversify. So no matter how you mix up your channels, whether it's marketplace, whether it's drop shipping on behalf of a retailer or sending inventory into a direct distribution center, you need to have a playbook and a system stack that allows you to switch back and forth depending on how you fulfill your orders, right? And a good example of this is kind of like when you sell, for example, you're drop shipping for major retailers, right? And the holiday season comes and they all of a sudden want to bulk buy some of your fast moving SKUs. Obviously for capital efficiencies in Q4, you want to consolidate the amount of inventory you have so that you're not sending 4 or 5 boxes to the same household, right? A good example of this also is when you're sending inventory into Amazon as 1P versus, doing seller fulfilled prime or fulfilled by merchant, right? Those require inherently 2 different systems of operations from a warehouse perspective, palletizing goods versus sending them as eaches, right? So in the next slide, we're gonna kind of focus on what it is to have what's called a fault-tolerant network design. And selling across multiple channels kind of puts you in a position where you need to have inventory in multiple locations. Beyond having customized business rules and systems to adhere to the unique SLAs of your trading partners, leveraging a multi-nodal fulfillment network helps provide layers of inventory to prevent total outages in the event of a demand spike, right? And that's very, very obvious in today's world where, you can see that. And I think, we've talked about this a bit so far on this call today, but you can see that over the last couple of months, the spike in demand has depleted inventory stores in the US. So for the purposes of staging and fulfillment, it's good to have a distributed fulfillment network. Other advantages of having multiple nodes for fulfillment is obvious. It might not seem obvious, but it is obvious, is lowering shipping costs, right? The more inventory you have next to the customer, the shorter the time is to send to the customer, but it's also cheaper to ship to the customer. So having multiple nodes across multiple geographies, if you're selling in multiple geographies, helps alleviate that stress. And from a Shipwire perspective, I think I've talked a bunch about Shipwire today, but from a Shipwire perspective, this has been a really, since the day we were born, essentially, this has been a effective strategy, right? We were the first to kind of have a distributed network of fulfillment warehouses globally to reduce costs. And now I think with our new phase of growth with our Shipwire Partner Plus program, we're actually partnering with 3PLs in the US, in the UK, in Australia, in China, to actually leverage their systems and connect them directly to customers through the Shipwire platform. This year on roadmap, we have about 12 more 3PLs we're bringing online to increase that distribution. If you are a fast growing branded manufacturer, this is obviously something that your operations team is probably looking into, especially when you're shipping in multiple geographies. So, and I think as a parting thought, the three strategies that I think from an operations perspective that will help brands scale are going to be variety, redundancy, and the last is probably going to be financial stability. I think right now, a lot of brands are seeing that their providers, not just their fulfillment providers, but some of their even SaaS providers are failing from a financial perspective, whether it's expanding into new facilities, trying to get new racking. Financial stability from a 3PL perspective is definitely quite important, but also for all the other vendors in your operations stack, you have to vet them out from a financial stability perspective in order to make sure that they can last as long as you do. And that's pretty much all I have for you today. I think for me, if you are looking to take a look at your operation stack and you'd like to audit your fulfillment and network design strategy, my email is on the screen. You could also reach out on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and I'm always available. Thank you. Thank you, Gina. Thank you, team.
Thank you, Gene. All right, we're going to do a quick Q&A round. I know a lot of you guys have already asked questions in the questions tab. Be sure to do that now as well if you've been holding back. First question, we're actually going to talk a little bit about bundling. Chad, I think you put a response here, but where does bundling actually take place in the warehouse, or is it something that you do as a back-end functionality? So Chad?
Yep. So to quickly zoom out, bundling, kitting, it's one way that I increase my average order value, increase the basket size on checkout, and also just explode our SKU counts so that people don't have to choose between Coke or Pepsi. They can sort of have it all in one bundle when they click checkout. So there's two ways you can do it. You can create what we call virtual bundles or kits. A virtual bundle means you create this bundle on a platform, an e-commerce platform, or on Amazon or on any of your channels. And based on that listing, you can use a software to break down that bundle into the core components. That's one approach. The other approach is you can leverage a 3PL or your own in-house fulfillment center, and you can, like Shipwire as a 3PL, for example, and you can essentially pre-assemble those core components into the kit or the bundle that you want. So there's two approaches. I like to put my toes in the water to see if they're warm first, and I like to just create those bundles on the fly virtually. And then as they sell well, then I'll actually pre-assemble them either on the warehouse level or on the factory level.
Great, thank you. Also, while we have you on, Chad, does Skubana have any limitations for international companies with fulfillment located inside different countries? That's from Deborah.
Yeah, so you can create, using our order bots, you can orchestrate different fulfillment centers based on location and based on a whole bunch of other criteria. And yeah, you can do that all within Skubana. However, right now we are predominantly focused on US dollars. So when it comes in, the FX is transferred back into the US dollar.
Awesome. And then I actually have a question for Jill. Jill, from Inventory Planner, what are some of the ways to manage inventory when it's spread across different warehouses? So playing off of the past question, whether or not you have inventory domestically or internationally, what's the best way to manage that?
Yeah, so a couple components to this. One, keep in mind that each warehouse or location is going to have its own personality in terms of forecasting demand, whether that's online or offline. It's East Coast, West Coast. It's selling Amazon Canada versus Amazon US. You're going to have different demands for each one of those. So calculate forecast individually for each location. Then once you have the demand, think about comparing the stock, comparing the demand between those two so that you can optimize your inventory. So there's no need to keep buying inventory from your supplier. If you already own it, it's a matter of shifting that, especially domestically. It could be worth it. Definitely keep in mind shipping costs there. But I think the first thing is to look at drilling down on that demand so you know it for that location, and then optimizing to see what stock you already own and where it would be best positioned.
Great. And also, piggybacking off of the bundles question that we just asked Chad, how can you figure out how much to order when you have one product that sells on its own, but that's also part of a kit?
Yeah, definitely. So Inventory Planner can handle bundle configurations. So if you have one component or raw good that goes into several different bundles, if it's a component, it could even be sold on its own. You need to know the total demand. So definitely keep in mind those bundle configurations. We'll bring that in from your connected platform automatically, so there's not, double the setup or anything like that. And then the two types of setup for bundles that Chad just talked through, whether it's a virtual bundle that's basically bundled on fulfillment, or if it's something that's pre-assembled, that'll have a big effect on the demand planning too, because we're looking at your stock in different ways. So in terms of bundling, yes, definitely take a look at how does the demand for the final good translate to all of its components, so that you're ordering enough to cover everything.
Great. And Nathan, this one's for you. What's the best way to find factories in Vietnam? I guess you have an attendee that's exploring that.
Yeah, I was, in Vietnam, there's some resources online. Some of the marketplaces like Global Sources and Alibaba have, offices there. So they're trying to get more factories online. But, at the end of the day, I think in Vietnam and outside of China, your best bet is to work with, a sourcing agent or a platform like Sourcify.
Awesome. And Jean, one last question. This is about 3PLs. We have an attendee who is branching off to D2C soon, but primarily using Amazon. He's not sure if he should keep fulfilling via FBA or move to a single 3PL. He wants to maintain his Prime badge and sell a fulfilled Prime.
That's a great question. And I think that there's no way to generally answer questions like this because there's obvious there are things that are obviously subjective, right? So your SKU count, your SKU mix, where you're trying to sell. I wouldn't recommend just pulling everything out of FBA, obviously, because if your Prime badge is important to you and you don't have seller fulfilled Prime, it's going to take a while to build up to that. Another obvious thing is if you're diversifying the amount of 3PLs you have, you never want to make dramatic changes there. You want to slowly change. So even if you end up in a situation where you have seller fulfilled Prime, you want to transition that out to a 3PL as opposed to just switching it off, right? That makes a lot more sense.
That does.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Jean. And I think that's all the time we have for questions. We're about 7 minutes over the hour. I want to thank all of the speakers for joining me today. Tomorrow we have part 2 of this session, which you will be automatically registered for if you registered for the first session. And you'll be able to tune in tomorrow at 2 p.m. same time. The recording for this webinar will be available using the same login. And actually, it should start shortly after I end the webinar. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and stay safe. Goodbye.